You have got to, okay, I'll just do it this way. Let's see, echo.
Oh, there's echo today?
I'm not sure. That's so. One of the reasons the last time we had to change the recording, the vocals, was because of echo, and I want to make sure. So Doug is back, and he can hear us. So Doug,
Howdy, Doug.
Are we echoing? I liked it better the other way. I'm not quite sure what to make of that, Doug. Right? You know, so I guess with that, compañeros, it's the Eugene and Kevin show.
It's about time.
Yeah.
I finally got an upgrade to co-host.
I feel like North Carolina. There's a North Carolina uprising at the moment, right? Oh gosh. Okay, so for those who aren't live, we're gonna take it from the top here, and let me just make sure. I guess through the magic of editing, we'll take care of the opening. So let me say, compañeros, welcome once again. Second time is the charm to our live stream today and to our podcast. This is episode 219, and I am joined by Kevin Fiesel.
Hello.
And Eugene Meininger.
Howdy.
Yes, who is patiently waiting. He's like, come on, man. I got things to paint. I got figurines to paint.
I can go find some. Yeah.
Okay, so thanks for the patience there, compañeros. So if you were on the live stream, we apologize, and thanks for hanging in there. Okay, so today our topic is SQL Server inventory. And so part of the reason getting back into some of this, and I know the question was asked, hey, can you kind of get back into some SQL Server, I don't know if internals is the right word, but some SQL Server basics. And I think more of these topics will come. If you've ever tried speaking, hopefully you can appreciate how hard it is sometimes to come up with a subject. I know it seems somewhat easy. But sometimes you just rack your brain. You're like, I have no idea what to talk about. But we've had at SQL Data Partners, we've had a little change, and we have rehired. What's the word? So we had an intern last year, and Jason Jenkins, and now he's come back onto the team, or he's joined the team full time. And so we're going through some training with Jason, and I think this is going to generate some ideas for us for topics to discuss. And that's the genesis of today's topic is, hey, we have customers, we have all these servers. It'd be really great to take a peek, or how does he get familiar with the inventory? And in reviewing some of it, we noticed some of it was a little bit out of date, and we're like, oh, we should probably update that. So how do you do that? So that's the genesis of today's topic. But as always, before we get too far into that, we do have a couple of shout outs. And again, thanks everybody who's tuning in live stream. If you have questions or topics that you think our podcast should be taking, obviously you can put those into the chat. If you're on social media, we have been checking it. Admittedly, I'm not checking it every day, but we have the Ask SDPP, Ask with SQL Data Partners Podcast. Yeah, use that hashtag, and we will try to get your question on the show today. And in fairness, we actually do have a listener comment / grumble that we'll get to, and get a hot take from Kevin and Eugene here on. But before
I am a hot take factory.
The hot take factory. But before we get into all of that, we have a couple of shout outs we want to give. Frederick Clement, Mike Kraus, Mike Saf, Roger A. Smith, and Ruben Moreno. So thanks, compañeros, for giving us a little love on social media. We do appreciate it. And we appreciate you tuning in and to the show. So before we get into our other topic of business, we have March 18th. So 3 weeks from tomorrow, SQL Trail, March 2021. I have built my time machine, and we will be going back to the year 2018. SQL Trail is coming up in March, and we have two of our speakers. So we're going to have four speakers this year. We're lucky enough to have Kevin and Eugene. Gonzalo and Mariano are going to be doing a session, and then Frank Levine is going to be doing another session as well. So two folks from Microsoft will be talking with us. So what I wanted to do here is give these guys an opportunity to give the abstract for their sessions and tell us a little bit about what they're going to be talking about. And we have a battle to see who will go first. Rock, paper, scissors. Should we do the RPS method of deciding who goes first?
It seems more like chicken. Who can sit here and make it the most awkward the longest?
I think Kevin's going to win on the awkwardness thing.
You're going to take that, Kevin? You know, he's trying to say, well, I'm not awkward, right? So obviously I'm not going to win this.
No, Kevin's just good at anything he commits to. That's all. But yeah, so you want me to give the elevator pitch for my talk at SQL Trail?
Fair enough.
Yeah. All right. Well, so my talk is a little bit idealistic because it assumes that you have a data warehouse that isn't being held together with paper clips and duct tape and all that kind of stuff. And if you want to have one of those, then you should really talk to Carlos about some of our services, right? Yeah. But the goal is to show how easy it is, how quickly you can start using Power BI if you've already got your data in that kind of shape, because Power BI was designed to work with that kind of star schema, snowflake schema kind of data. And so you can really start just dragging and dropping data and then start layering in detail and business meaning on top of that as you go. So I'm really excited to talk about how to take advantage of your data warehouse with Power BI.
Yeah, awesome. So one of the reasons for this is that we do have a couple of customers that end up with, and maybe data, even data warehouse might be a bit of a stretch, but let's just call them data marts. Right? Mm-hmm. They've started I shouldn't say aggregating necessarily, but they're pulling together data from disparate sources, right? And trying to make sense of it. And you're like, okay, well, hey, how can we visualize that? How can we take advantage of it? Mr. Kevin?
Yeah, maybe I should have gone first instead because Eugene did a really good job there.
Yeah.
So the title of my SQL Trail talk is going to be Getting Stuck in the Cloud, an overview of Azure product offerings. The idea is you have your major cloud providers, your AWS, your Azure, Google Cloud, Alibaba, Bob's Cloud Warehouse. Each one of these offers dozens of separate services, labels them with terms IaaS, PaaS, SaaS, or DTaaS, which is duct tape as a service, which is what Carlos offers in his cloud. So this talk gives you an introduction to the Microsoft Azure space, including some important terminology, key concepts around cloud-based service development. The concept is we're going to look at a few reference architectures, get an understanding of the different types of services that they use and why these make sense as they do.
There you go. So again, I think that's going to be an interesting session. Again, lots of discussion about it. And admittedly, at the end of the day, we're trying to make some of this more approachable for folks who are thinking about it, right? And how they can make sense of it. So registration is free this year. Yeah, there are some paid tiers. So if you'd like to come and network with us and the other speakers at the end, we are going to charge you for that. But we'll also send you a T-shirt and some other swag, right? So you can feel like you're at a real conference. And we've tried to make that as approachable as we can, right, over a Zoom format. And learning from our mistakes, it'll be half day. So we're starting at noon. So from noon to 5 Eastern is our time slot. And we hope, compañeros, if you check out SQLtrail.com, that will be a registration. And I can't help but give a shout out to Doug, who I don't think I've seen a registration for, Doug. So
peer pressure.
You need to hop on that. Okay. So let's see. I got an email the other day. So from my friend and neighbor, he actually lives like 3 blocks away from me, ironically enough. And we met through our civic association. And And so I'm not sure, is he going by Data Scientist 7? So his name is Kevin. I guess I will, so for the sake of the innocent.
Other Kevin.
Another Kevin, right? Not Kevin Fiesel. So Kevin, but he goes by Data Scientist 7, and he had created a little bit of a stir on, oh gosh, why am I forgetting the name? What's Steve Jones's?
Ask SQL Server Central.
Ask SQL Server Central. Thank you. So he had put something up there and caused quite a stir. And so Kevin was, or Mr. Data Scientist 7 was I'm going to say he's complaining, right? So his situation is, so he considers himself a data scientist, and he says, I'm listening to your podcast, Carlos, and he's like, I wonder why for the small to medium-sized databases or small state-sized databases like mine, because he worked for a state agency, why don't you mention that a lot of the DBA stuff is unnecessary? My daily Excel data mart only stores what it needs. I do not have to spend any time supersizing it. And that SQL Server wastefulness is on the top, wasting half the internet bandwidth and half of the file space on stupid zeros on unused double byte text. Sincerely, Data Scientist 7.
The live stream audience gets my official take.
And Amanda will can pierce out what he doesn't want the general public to know.
No, it's just that on the podcast, you're not going to be able to see that wonderful look that I gave of, I don't think you're quite right on everything, that this would be worth having a discussion about to get an understanding. So,
so I can provide you a little bit more framework, right? So he is not on the data team, and I think doesn't have direct access to the database. And I think he has, like many of us, right, has some experience with Excel, has just enough credentials to get data out of the system, and is kind of like, you know what, I'm just going to do my thing in Excel, and you guys can forget about what you call them. You guys can forget about the database. I just do my thing in Excel. And I think that's a little bit more where Kevin's coming from.
Right. And, on that front, I don't inherently have a problem with the idea. So there are concerns about data lineage. There are concerns about longevity of this data, about restoration of the data in the event that something goes catastrophically wrong. But if you're just talking about, I need to take a slice of data to perform some processing work, I need to, say, train a model, and I need to get some data to do that training. And really, I just need a one-time snapshot of information so that I can train this model. If that's your use case, that doesn't have to be living in SQL Server forever and work with it within SQL Server. Extract it out as a flat file or as some other format, Parquet file, whatever, and work with it from there. Sure. There are potential concerns around, say, PII, PHI, depending on the state agency you're at. If you are covered under HIPAA, well, you're going to have to protect that information. And part of protecting that information is you may not necessarily get to keep a bunch of, say, names of individuals, of patients in an Excel spreadsheet, because it'll be hard to detect that on a network that, this is information that needs to be protected specially. Sure. If it's on your local machine, there may be issues around encryption at rest. There may be issues around how you're storing that data where you might accidentally be in violation of specific rules. If you're not, okay, no, I can understand the point that you don't, you have different use cases for different things. And if you just need a place to store data, not really updating it, not really working with it, not really doing anything other than load that data, process it in Python and R in some other language, and again, not really doing much else with it, yeah, don't store it in SQL Server if you don't have to. But going much further than that, you get into problems of there's a reason databases exist. There's a reason they're complicated. And there's a lot of functionality that may not necessarily apply to you, but they apply to a lot of organizations and a lot of people. And they may actually still apply to you. You just don't know it.
Right. One of the other things that I kind of take away from this is like my daily Excel data mart, which means that the data is not living in his Excel file, right? It's living in a database, and he's just pulling it out because for whatever reason, I guess he doesn't have the tools. There might be some limits on SQL Server analysis services, if I feel like I've heard him remember that right, or he doesn't have the rights to create some of that stuff, which could also be the case.
Yeah, and jumping further off of that, if you're talking about, say, I'm using Excel to access data that's stored in SQL Server, that's also fine. It's a good tool for the job. If you're familiar with Excel, pivot tables are second nature to you, and this is a good way for you to analyze the data, I got no beef with that.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, now in defense of my my fellow administrators, I think, of course, I don't know the people on his team at all, but I'm wondering. So he made mention of data formats, right, being incorrect. Why is that not? Why can you not have that discussion? Be like, hey guys, why does this have to be a double byte text, right? Should we take a look at what this data, like maybe at one time it was supposed to be that, and now it needs to be something different, right? And for our purposes, we need that data to be changed.
Well, that's part of my grimace that if you're that concerned about in varchar using Unicode, okay, turn on row level compression. If you don't need the double bytedness, if you don't need anything beyond standard, say the ASCII character set, well, row level compression is going to get you back down to the same size, plus have some additional benefits, while protecting you in the event that, it turns out that we actually do have text, say that's in Chinese or Japanese or Turkish or Hebrew or some other language that's not covered in this set.
Sure. Yeah, and so obviously, easier said than done. I mean, but I think you mentioned using the other languages outside of SQL Server. I guess I would also say in the newer versions of SQL Server, I mean, you mentioned Python and and whatnot. There are functionalities now, so you can push some of that back to SQL Server. And I would be hard pressed to imagine, even at a state agency, that your SQL Server is equally as powerful or less powerful than your workstation where you're trying to do all that processing, right? So, there could be some benefits. You could, push some of that processing back to SQL Server. Now, that doesn't mean that you need to send every order, like SQL Server has to do every order by, right? That's not what I'm saying. But again, right, I guess I think it reminds me of the episode that we did. Oh gosh, and I don't have the podcast calendar up.
Well, while Carlos is doing that, I'll vamp a little bit.
Here we go.
Say, I actually have a video about using invarchar for everything, because I would rather default to Unicode. I don't think that there are really strong cases why I would want to have columns in varchar if I have the ability to compress those columns. Like that obviates almost every benefit that you have around varchar versus nvarchar.
Right. And
keeping columns in nvarchar gives you a lot of benefit, especially down the road if you ever have to do that internationalization work. It was a lot more common, say 15 years ago, just to have varchar for everything because, well, that was the norm. In varchar not really being in the ANSI SQL of the 1990s, but those data types are now prevalent for good reason. And I don't think that there is a real benefit not to use them.
That's fair, right? So again, I think that's the idea is, are you missing out perhaps on some benefit that the database could give you, right?
And you're not really hitting a bunch of cost, especially, again, compress those indexes. If you have no capacity to compress, like if you're using standard edition and you can't do index compression because you're prior to 2016 SP1, you have a story there.
Sure.
But I don't know.
Yeah, and now all of a sudden I'm still blanking here. We met with man, you guys are gonna hate me. So it's one of the guys from .NET Rocks, and I am drawing a complete blank on his name.
Was it Richard Campbell or Carl Franklin?
It was Campbell. Thank you. Oops. Come on, there he is. So episode 110. How do I build trust on my team? Right. So we talk about so building trust, and ultimately, so again, I feel like part of this problem is that there's silos, right? There's two groups, and for whatever reason, they ain't talking, right? They're not getting along for whatever reason, and could we come to some happy medium? Easier said than done. Fair enough, but again, so Kevin, why is SQL Server so complicated? I guess it's doing some complicated stuff, right? There's some pretty neat things happening in the database these days. Now, is it overkill for what you need? Right? Perhaps, right? And Kevin's giving you the green light to go back and be like, see, I can't put this in Excel, right? I wonder if you drop that name in your next meeting. Well, Kevin Fiesel said. Let me know how far that goes. I digress.
Note that my hot take was mostly sitting on the fence about it, though.
Sure. No, oh, that's right. I mean, I think perhaps we don't have all the details here, right? And there's, we're hypothesizing just a little bit here. Okay, so very good. So we wanted to get into, so our topic today ultimately is SQL Server inventory, or inventory, right? Server inventory. And when I broached this subject, Kevin, you were like, easy button. Where is it? I got this.
Well, I wanted to save that until a little bit later.
Oh, okay.
After we started talking about, after we talked about some of the techniques, because it's not an easy button.
And that's fair, because I was going to be like, anyway. It seems a little bit more complex. So let me start with the, I'm not sure if it's easy button, but it is, and in fact, I'm actually going to scooch over here, and let's see if this works. Oops, I just pushed the wrong button.
Well, there goes our audience. You just pushed the kill the audience button.
Kill the audience button. No, luckily they're still here.
I don't know why you have that button.
Yeah.
We keep losing good audience members.
I know. It's just one of those fun things. You're just like, oh, but I want to. It's right in the middle, right? Okay, so and I don't have it up here, right? But okay, so we all have had the experience of going over to, right? You get a new SQL Server, you get connected to it, and you're like, hey, let me start cruising around. And so I'm like, what version of this? Now I'm using Azure SQL Database, right? Which I guess actually does give me that detail as well, right? So you can connect, it gives you some information. You're like, okay, well, at least let me know what version that I'm working with. And I know Brent, so shout out to Brent Ozar. So back in the day, had a takeover script that I think has been replaced in the Blitz. At least I don't see him talking about it anymore, but I could just be missing out on that. But it was basically, right, a script of, hey, what's this, right? Select this, take a peek, right? Select star from sys databases. And I remember even in his notes, he was like, okay, now's where you take out a pencil, or, however you're going to take your notes, right? And start capturing some of this information. The downside is that, right, you're one server at a time. You have to kind of manage everything, and where do you put all that stuff, right? How are you gonna do all those pieces? So I wanted a way to do that, a little bit faster, or get some additional detail. And I guess before we get away from the T-SQL piece, am I missing anything from a purely SQL Server Management Studio, or two cents here?
Well, I mean, I have some process thoughts, but I don't know if we're at that point yet.
So I'm about to jump into PowerShell.
Okay, because I mean, I would talk about things like or central management servers, and
okay, that's fair.
as well as process, because I guess there are a couple of scenarios that we would want to take ourselves through in this. The first one is, hi, I'm the first DBA this company's ever had. Okay, where are the databases? Well, we know of these two databases. We know of these two instances. Good luck finding the rest of them. And then you find out that somebody's got a production SQL server that's in a Raspberry Pi in a shoebox someplace. You find out that people just launch databases all across the environment. They really depend on these things, but nobody even knew that they existed. So that part of inventorying is really important. I think that's where Carlos is going with PowerShell.
Sure.
Now, once you figure out, okay, here are the SQL Server instances, putting them into a central management server is a really good way to collate them, to know, here are my 13 instances that I need to care about as a database administrator. Here's, say, broken out by folder. Here are my prod servers, my dev servers. If I have servers that are warehouse servers versus other things. So I'm able to folder them essentially as a way of tagging them and querying across them.
Yep. And I think that would be the biggest piece, at least the biggest benefit that I see. And again, I guess because I generally, for whatever reason, the content management servers haven't really caught on with me. Only, I guess, because I'm hopping between different places. But I do agree that it is nice to be able to say, hey, let me take this one query and execute it across multiple servers. And that's where the content management servers are super helpful.
Yeah, they are really
without
helpful
having
for
to
that.
jump into PowerShell and all that other stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, they're also helpful just to remember that things exist.
Sure. Well, okay, so now I know it at Channel Advisor, right? They've got thousands or whatever. They've got a lot of probably more than double digits, right? Of SQL servers.
More than double digits, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a little bit harder. I would say that for the rest of us mere mortals, we have few enough databases, we have few enough database servers that SQL Server Management Studio can remember all of them in the drop down.
I don't know. My small time state job, I was responsible for 13 instances. I still used a central management server for it just because I wanted to remember.
Sure.
I wanted to make sure I would not forget about the dev warehouse or the staging OLTP instance, because you start doing stuff and it's easy to say, I need to do this operation across these instances, especially when it is a manual operation back before DBA tools was popular, back when PowerShell was in its infancy. And you're doing these tasks across even a dozen instances, it can be easy to forget one of them.
Sure. That's fair. Yeah, so I agree, but sorting them some way, right? Defining them, that's probably even super helpful when you do find them. And admittedly, that approach assumes that you know where they are. Even getting into some of the DBA tools stuff, right? You still have to specify what you're pointing at, right? It makes you pick a target, which is, I guess, that next piece. So I am using so let me go switch back over here. And I am using a Azure SQL database, which I had some trouble actually connecting to with this or getting this information. So I did not care, I suppose, to commit more time to figuring it out. I'm like, I have a database that works. I'll do that. So if you go to DBA Tools and you're actually looking at SQL Server Inventory, it will take you to a blog post, which we'll have on our show notes for today. And he puts together, right, hey, where am I? Or like, where's my script supposed to be? He wants a CSS file, which he makes one available in his GitHub repository, which again, the link is there. But ultimately, he leverages a couple of DBA tools. Now, what I'm not showing here is you have to specify this production servers variable, which you can. He has an example of bringing in through a text file, or in this case, if you just wanted to do one, you just specify it and then you can run it. And basically, what it's doing is it's helping you put together your SQL queries, and then running that against the database you choose. And in this case, it's actually going to spit out an HTML file. His last step is going to spit out an HTML file, and so you get the information that you're looking for. Which I guess brings me to the next point of how much information is too much to collect. So here we're getting some pretty high level things, right? Like I just need to know at a snapshot, like where you fit into the universe. It doesn't necessarily answer Kevin's question of, hey, this is a dev server or this is a warehouse server or things like that. But it can give you some lay of the land type scenarios. And so again, I think you could if you have your content management server, again, same query could get you some of this information. It does a couple of interesting things. Instead of giving you the details about the databases, it just gives you counts, right? How many, how big they are, right? Which one is the biggest, so on. So I thought that was kind of an interesting take on how to collect some of that information. And compañeros, admittedly, this is where I was hoping to ask the community, because I know that there are lots of you. And oh my gosh, early onset dementia, compañeros. Right. It's a thing. It's happening. I can remember where he is. He's in Rochester, New York. But why can I not?
Andy Levy.
Thank you, Andy. So
I need to have like a podcast episode where you just give us weird pieces of information as big as possible. It's like has a dog named Rocky. It's like Drew Ferguel.
Yeah.
He's a guy. He wears a hat.
Yeah, right. He's never gonna live that down. That's
Hi, Lonnie.
Brand now.
Yeah. SQL Server Community Who's Who edition.
Yeah, exactly.
So I know Andy, right, and others are doing lots with DBA tools, right? So I'm interested to know. So this is the blog post that they put out on the DBA tools website points us here. So Andres, I believe, if I remember correctly, was the one who put together the post. So, but I'm interested to see who else has leveraged a little bit more of this. I mean, obviously there are other additions. Like for one thing, I put in the string version into that. It's not part of the original query. I just wanted to add something to it. So I know that people are getting more details from it. So I'm curious if you have something like that, if you have a blog that you've put out about that, using DBA tools to get SQL Server inventory, we'd love to give you a shout out about this. Mm-hmm. So just let us know, connect with us however you want, email carlos@SQLDataPartners.com. And I'd love to go through it and see what else is out there. So this is, I guess, that's the PowerShell option. I should mention that there is one other option. Let's see, I don't think I have it up. So Randall, or is it Randall?
Randolph?
Van Dyke. Let's see.
Kendall
Van Dyke. Thank you. See,
you're just like blurring people together.
It's like the community, the SQL Server community, cyborg.
I think Carlos is just making up names at this point. John came up with this.
So he had one, and again, which I'll put in the show notes. It's still up on GitHub. It was on the old, whatever the old Windows, to like you post your stuff, and that they've taken down and now moved everything to GitHub. But as Kendall has moved on to Microsoft, it hasn't been touched in a little while, and it's not leveraging the DBA tools kind of core functionality, because he did this before DBA tools had kind of hit its stride, if you will. And so I found it to be, I don't want to, I'm not trying to throw shade, right? But I just found like maybe there was for me who and I'm not steeped in PowerShell, I didn't think it was necessarily the best way to go, right? I would have preferred to use this. So, although in fairness, he is getting a lot more detail, right? Which brings me to the last piece, or the last way, and then we can talk about your button, perhaps, Kevin. And again, so this is a bit more in the, hey, I have no information about my SQL servers or what's out there. How can I do this? And I used to joke, I'm not sure how true it is, but I can always tell organizations who have gone through a Microsoft licensing assessment, because I will inevitably find this tool. And I feel like it's what Microsoft uses to be like, okay, so what are you really running in your environment, right? You say you have 10 licenses, but you've got 15 SQL Server servers, right? What's all that about? So what's nice about this, I mean, it can do other pieces beyond just the database. I generally am only using it for the database. So it's a tool that Microsoft has put out. We call it the MAP tool, so the Microsoft Assessment and Planning tool. It can also help you do things like, hey, do I have Oracle that I can move over to SQL Server? Or do I have on-premise SQL servers that would be okay, or that are cloud ready? Is the term that they like to use. So you can go out there, you can give it a highly privileged account, and it can go out there and touch all the servers and be like, hey, do you have SQL Server on you? And if you do, right, let me kind of pump you for information. Now, one of the things that I've found is that it can potentially have a little, I want to say too much information, but it ultimately spits out 2 Excel files that you then get to pick through. And so the first one, actually, I think I want to take a peek. Oh yeah, this is the database details, right? So the summary information is kind of similar to what we were seeing there, right? So in this case, I have instances, the number of databases, et cetera, right? And then it goes out and it starts to expand on all the stuff that is on there and gives you information about the properties of all the databases. Which again, I think is helpful, but I also thought that in some cases, right, like I may not necessarily want to keep track of all of these pieces like all the time on a regular basis. And the other thought is, okay, well, how do I compare, right? So if I take an inventory in January and I take an inventory in March, right? I just want to see what's different. And admittedly, that's one of the things I'd like to get to with the PowerShell, is to be able to spit out, those files and then have PowerShell, kind of compare and be like, hey, these things are different, and kind of make that available to me. So the other file is in the assessment, right? Again, it gives me the information about the instances, right, and what's on there. So it's a little higher level in terms of what's there, a little more at the server instance. So again, I find this, I've used this in the past, particularly, instead of doing a takeover type script, I find the Microsoft assessment tool gives me that, right? And allows me to, to get that information. But it would seem that that's not the only option.
Nope. There are other options available as well. And, this is in, again, the I don't know what servers I have mode. And there are a couple of techniques that we can use. One of them is actually to use a port scanner. So I can use a tool like Nmap and perform a network scan. Now, first,
a word of caution.
Yeah, the word of caution is have
put yours in.
Yeah, have explicit approval to use this, because if people see that you're using it on your own network, then depending on what role you're in, there may be repercussions. There are potential risks around job security as a result of this, because it can be used as part of gaining information in prelude to an attack, or after an attack, understanding the internals of a network. So you may have scanning tools that pick up on the fact that, oh, this IP address is performing a port mapping. So especially if you have a security team, make sure you have clearance to do this. Assuming that you don't have a security team, or this is a small enough company, or you've got that clearance, you can use a port scanner. If everything's running on default instances, this is pretty easy. You essentially iterate over all the IP addresses, look on ports 1433, 1434, 1434 being the browser port. If you have the browser port open, the service, if you have that service on, that's actually a good thing in this case and probably no other case, because the browser will helpfully tell you as well, right. Oh, there are named instances on these ports. If you're using named instances, those are generally not on port 1433. You can even have a default instance not on 1433. Takes a little bit of effort, but you can do it. If you're not on 1433, you're now at a point where you essentially have to do a full iteration of ports above some arbitrary number, like say 50,000 or 10,000 or whatever, and look for any open services. That can take a lot longer. But if you just have a moderately sized network, you know the IP ranges, especially if it's on premises, and you have permission, port scanning can be a rather efficient way of finding that, yeah, this actually is a SQL Server right here. The other caveat is that if you're running this within a cloud network, like you're on Azure, you're on AWS, you're on Google, make sure you also check the rules behind that. Generally, they're okay with, I'm running a scan within my own subdomains, within my own VNets, within my own IP ranges. If you're running from the outside, usually they're okay with that as well. And that's covered under penetration testing. You might have to talk to your TAM with AWS or with Azure or whoever, just to let them know that, yes, we're doing this thing. But usually the rules are written such that you can do security-related scans on your own machines, your own VMs, your own devices. So if you're in that scenario, usually you can do this. You can't just go willy-nilly and hit everybody on the internet. That's how you get blocked. That's how potentially you get into legal problems.
Yeah. Two notes on my end. So one, when you are doing it, not only look at the rules, but look at what speed setting you put it to, because it is really easy to put it on aggressive mode if you're playing with Nmap and cause a lot of trouble. So that's one thing. But the other thing is, presumably the audience here are database administrators. Well, if there's any other database administrators in your company, make sure they know you're doing this. Don't just get the okay from your boss, because I know from personal experience, you will give the DBA a heart attack, because that happened to me, because they'll be looking through the logs and it'll say like connection forcibly closed by IP 192. whatever, right?
Right.
And it looks like someone's trying to break in, and it's like, oh no, they did a port scan, and port scans, they range quite a bit in complexity, right? So some of them, if you're just doing a basic stuff, it's just seeing, okay, can I make a connection? But there can be more complicated stuff, especially with like Nmap. Like if you're trying to guess what the operating says, for example, it'll do really goofy stuff with like malformed packets, or just trying to detect if the port is like stealth open kind of thing. So definitely make sure not only do your your boss know, but any other DBAs, because it's going to show up in the logs and it's going to look really suspicious.
Sure. And to that point, if they have the alert set up, right? I think it's severity 20, right?
Yeah.
It should.
I think
throw,
it's an error. Yeah.
It should throw the throw the alert as well.
Yeah. And if they don't, we know some great DBAs for hire that can help get you set up.
Yeah, because we have that problem because people want to do some security testing, and so we'll inevitably get like, hey, there's this. So we now have rules, right? Where if it comes from this IP address at this time of day, right, that it's okay. But if it's not, then it has to flag us, and that's when we have to get involved, right?
Yeah.
So, well, compañeros, so I admit, I guess maybe I've just been a good boy. I have not had the pleasure, I suppose, or the consequences of getting involved with the Nmap stuff. There is, I guess, one other tool that I will throw out there. So the SCCM tools, again, if you're generally like from a database administrator perspective, I have not seen those teams have them. It's generally more your infrastructure, right? Like your Citrix or your oh gosh, what's the Microsoft VMware, not VMware, what's the Microsoft Hyper-V? Oh my gosh. Right, the folks who are in charge of those environments, right, may have SCCM, right, and that's another way to get some of that information if you're looking for it. So did we miss one, compañeros? Right? What do you think? How do you do your inventories? We'd love to get your thoughts and feedbacks, particularly for those of you who are using or trying to use or leverage the DBA tools components to do that. Let us know, and we will be we'll give you a shout out on the show here. And I guess, oh my gosh, I guess we really are. We're gonna provide a link to the Nmap inventory tool on the show notes today. So I absolve myself from all consequences, right?
So that link actually is from Red Hat. It's about using Nmap to inventory across an entire environment of a bunch of different services, not just SQL Server, but also a lot of other things, where you may be running old versions of JBoss or Struts or something like that.
Right. Okay, very good. I think that is going to do it for today's episode. I'm sorry, Doug, I'm not ignoring you. If you're still around, thank you for registering for SQL Trail. We'll see you on the 18th. We hope to see the rest of you, compañeros. If you want to reach out to us before then, again, hashtag AskSQLSDPP or AskSDPP, Ask SQL Data Partners Podcast, or you can reach out to us on social media. Eugene.
I am at SQLGene on Twitter, and I blog at SQLGene.com.
Kevin.
You can ask for my credentials from the SQL Server browser, but I recommend disabling the service.
There you go. So I thought we were going to have to run some Red Hat parameter, or Nmap parameter to get your information. I thought that's where you were going to go today. And compañeros, you can reach out to me. I am at Carlos L. Chacon on LinkedIn. Or like I said, you can send me an email, carlos@SQLDataPartners.com. Thanks again for tuning in today. We do appreciate it. And I hope to see you on the SQL Trail.
SQL Data Partners.